Okay, so today I'm going to be talking about basic concepts in statistics. The first is sample versus population. So a police department in Taiwan wanted to know which people of which zodiac sign were the most or least gullible and the most likely to become scam victims. So the police department devised a short game and recorded people's scores and their signs. They could not collect data from every Taiwanese, which is 23 million people, because it's unpractical and unnecessary. So in order to find findings or results that apply to an entire population of people, you almost never have access to the entire population, which can be either very general or very specific. So instead you collect data from a small subset of the population called a sample. So you use the data from the sample to infer characteristics about the entire population. The police department collected 1,899 people's information. So in this case, the sample size is 1,899 and the population is 23 million, or every Taiwanese. So if you have these 5 gullible scores of Aries, the mean would equal 41, but you also have to consider the deviation between the observed data and the mean. So if you look, there's a big gap between some of the values and the mean. So the deviation can be thought of as the error because the mean doesn't exactly predict every observed value. So to measure these errors or deviations, they thought maybe you could subtract the mean from each of the observed values. So if you were to take each of the values and subtract the mean of 41, you would get an answer of 0, because these numbers, in this case -9 and 9, would cancel each other out. -1 and 1 would cancel each other out, so you would get 0. So it makes it seem as if there's no deviation when there obviously is. So statisticians thought the best way was to square them. So you would subtract the mean from each value, square the value, and add these together. So in this case, it would be 164, and this is called the sum of squared errors, or the sum of squares. Now, if you were to calculate the average error or deviation, the population variation is greater than the sample, and you're trying to find results that apply to the entire population. So if you want to know the average deviation, we use the value of n, but since the data from the sample is to infer characteristics about the entire population, you have to divide the sum of squares by n-1, and this is called variance, or s squared. So this n-1 is called degrees of freedom. If you were to think of an example, if there's 6 candies and 6 friends all want a candy, the first 5 would get to choose between different candies, but the last one would just have one option left. And so n-1 kind of represents the degrees of freedom in the population. So the variance in this example, if you were to divide 164, which is the sum of squares, by 5 minus 1, you would get 41. In order to calculate the standard deviation, you would take the square root of the variance. So in this case, the square root of 41 would be 6.40, and this would be the standard deviation in the data set. So in this example, 6 friends rate Zach in terms of his intellectual level on a 1 to 10 scale as following. So there's 1, 3, 4, 0, 4, and 6. So first, to find the mean, so in this case you would get 3, so that is the mean. If you were to do the sum of squares, you would start with each value and you would subtract the mean, which is 3, and then square this, and then add the next value, subtract the mean, square it, and the next value, subtract the mean, until you subtracted the mean from each value and squared it. So if you were to take 1 minus 3, it would be -2, and -2 squared would be 4. If you were to take 3 minus 3, it would be 0, and 0 squared is 0. If you were to take 4 minus 3, it would be 1, and 1 squared is 1. 0 minus 3 would be -3, and -3 squared would be 9. And then 4 minus 3 would be 1, and 1 squared is 1. 6 minus 3 would be 3, and 3 squared is 9. So the sum of squares would equal 24. If you were to find the variance, you would take 24, which is the sum of squares, and divide by the degrees of freedom. So in this case, there's 6 data points in the sample, and you would subtract 1, and so it would be 24 divided by 5, which is 4.8, and this would be the variance. And then to find the standard deviation, you would take this 4.8 and take the square root of it, which would be 2.19. And so this would be your standard deviation.